hope that anyone has indications of fraud, if there are allegations like that, would not just simply use that word, but actually come out with the substance of what that fraud is.
I've talked to numerous officials from both campaigns today. Neither of them, neither side, willing to speculate on an end game, willing to rule out at what point they'll stop. They won't continue any sort of legal action. But let me ask you, when do you think, all reasonable things considered, we might actually be able to name a president-elect of the United States?
Well, I think we're going to get there. The framers of the Constitution recognize that these kinds of things could happen. That's the reason they set December, mid-December, for the electors to meet to make a decision. We're going to work through this. I mean, both George W. Bush and Al Gore, I believe, are prepared to assume the presidency. They've been saying that for the last year. The transition is not going to be that tough. So we're 5 days into this now. I think you'll probably begin to see by the end of this coming week, when the overseas ballots come in, when the recount's been completed, that in fact we have a decision.
George Sheldon, thanks very much for being with us. Again, the important time, 9:30 tomorrow morning, a courtroom in Miami. And we'll be right back.
Can you imagine a world where you can take your
presidential election, and a recount may take place in that southwestern state? NBC's George Lewis is following that story for us. He joins us now from Albuquerque, and that building that you're in front of is really ground zero of this.
Well, yeah, a lot of the paper ballots that are in contention are in this warehouse back here, being closely guarded by a sheriff's deputy. State police may move in at some point and take over the guard duty. The problem here in New Mexico is this. George Bush is ahead by the slimmest of margins, 17 votes in the entire state. What happened Friday night is there were some ballots in dispute, some damaged ballots, 355 of them, that the clerk was going to throw out. The Republicans requested a hand recount of those ballots, and the clerk, a Democrat, finally decided to go ahead and count those ballots, and that put Bush ahead by this razor-thin margin. Now the Democrats are crying foul, saying, wait a minute, the Republicans are opposing a hand recount in Florida and yet benefiting from one here. The state Democratic chairman held a news conference a little while ago. This is what she had to say.
Around New Mexico, in every county, there is no reason to have a physical impoundment of these ballots. We think it might be part of the new Republican scorch the earth policy which is taking place around the country, where they, because of the recount that is going on in Florida, they are fanning out into states across the country.
So New Mexico and some other states where the count is very close, including Iowa, Wisconsin, Oregon, may be the next battlegrounds, Lester. We're waiting to see if this thing spreads out. Monday will bring a whole new round of hearings here. Both sides will be before the voting clerk trying to decide what to do with this. They'll be in the courts. The state police may widen their impoundment of these ballots. It could cause the process here to grind to a halt.
All right, George Lewis, several potential battlefronts in the battle for the presidency. 5 electoral votes at stake there by itself. Not a huge change of the dynamics, but certainly it could play in. Now, we want to find out more about the Gore legal strategy, given that hearing in Tallahassee tomorrow in response to the Bush suit. NBC's Diane Diamond is in Washington. She's been following the Gore movements and can tell us more about what she's learned in the last few minutes. Diane?
Hey, Lester, I'm going to get off this phone now. We have been, thank you, that's Kate Casey taking our phone away from us. We were just on a conference call, and it is still continuing from Florida with Gore legal advisors agreed to talk to us tonight to tell us what their strategy was going to be in court tomorrow. Of course, big day in court there in Florida when a judge may rule either for or against George Bush's request for an injunction to stop that hand count in Florida. Here is what we know about the Gore courtroom strategy. By the way, it will be presented by Larry Tribe. He is a Harvard professor. He will be the attorney for Al Gore. But the bottom line is this. They are going to argue that the hand counts should proceed, that the so-called Tuesday deadline for certification of all of the hand counts should be let to lapse, to be determined at another date. And we learned that the Secretary of State of Florida has requested a meeting tomorrow with Warren Christopher and William Casey, 2 top Gore aides. They were here just a short while ago, so they will be traveling back to Tallahassee. I thought I heard them say that they'd be traveling back tomorrow. maybe there's no more flights out of Washington today. So we just don't know the time of that meeting. The counties of Broward, Volusia, Palm Beach say that they agree that this certification deadline should pass. They, two of them, Volusia and Palm Beach, plan to go to court to argue the same position that Al Gore has, that the certification should lapse. I took such quick notes. Let me look here. One of the arguments that the Bush camp makes is that by recounting, you're diluting the votes. Gore's argument on that tomorrow will be that there is tons of current Supreme Court precedents to turn that idea on its head, so that votes are not being diluted in their estimation. In fact, it is a bedrock constitutional right of all Americans to vote and have their votes counted. These are the arguments you'll hear tomorrow. Let's see, we're going to get a copy of all this later tonight, we're promised. Another Bush argument in court will be that the Florida statute is unconstitutional. And Gore's side will argue that it's not, that it will be very difficult for the Bush camp to prove that the statute in Florida ordering this recount is unconstitutional. And they will argue that the Bush campaign is relying on federalism, the federal government stepping on state rights, telling states what to do. Let's see, what else did we learn? The bottom line, this is a quote, "This case does not belong in federal court. You must leave something like this to state courts." I kept trying to get in a question about, would it be okay with you if it was filed in state court? I didn't get that answered. I'm going to go back on that conference call. Lester, back to you.
Diane, we'll let you get back to that call. I want to bring in John Shubin right now, who's been helping us. He's a Florida election law expert who's helping us understand what's going on. You heard what Diane was saying there. What struck me was that the Gore folks, if I understand it right, are saying we want to get past those Tuesday deadlines, which they consider, I suppose, artificial deadlines, and have more time to count votes. Does that change the dynamics of this?
I think it does, but I think that they're going to make that request in state court. I think they're going to support Volusia County, Broward County, and, well, Broward County and Dade County, to the extent Dade County wants to request to extend those deadlines. Are
you surprised? Was anything in what Diane said in terms of the Gore legal strategy, was any of that surprise you, or does it sound pretty much right on track?
It sounds right on track, particularly tomorrow morning, arguing this should be in state court. This is not for a federal court to decide.
What more? Beyond that argument, though, you've got they claim they have legal precedents that they can show. Is there really that much law out there on this sort of issue?
There is a little bit of law, but not that much. There's certainly a lot of law to say there's a whole body of law that federal courts shouldn't interfere with that is best left to the state courts. There's a lot of law saying that. Under these particular circumstances, there's not that much case law.
The impact of whatever this judge decides is huge. At what point does a judge in a situation like this realize that I'm compelled to act here? I can't simply shoo this aside, that somebody has to step in. Does that ever cross a judge's mind, or is it strictly by the letter of the law?
Judges are people. There's an old saying, the law is what the judge had for breakfast. And people can't ignore emotions that they have, just like you and me. And so judges are like anyone else. That might be a factor.
John, hang here for a minute. I think, Diane, are you off the phone yet?
I'm still listening, but I can tell you two other things, and I'd love to get Mr. Shubin to comment on this. They say that on the face of it, Kate, you keep listening to that phone call. They say on the faces of it, the George Bush argument absolutely fails because they cannot establish the prime thing here, that a recount has caused irreparable harm to the Bush campaign. And we asked if they lose tomorrow, if Al Gore's side loses tomorrow in court, would they go to a federal appeals court? They said they don't think they're going to lose. What do you think, Mr. Shubin?
I think what they're saying is that the Bush camp has not met the basis for an injunction. One of the factors being irreparable harm, that there will be no irreparable harm to the plaintiffs in the event that the injunction isn't issued. However, I think they're also arguing that there's no need to even get to this point if a federal court shouldn't be judging these state court issues.
Mm-hmm. And so is that the primary point, as they say? If George Bush can't prove that irreparable harm was done to his campaign, then it just gets tossed out?
Well, if they can't prove irreparable harm, they can't get an injunction. It doesn't necessarily mean that the entire case is knocked out of the box.
But picking up on that point, can you come back after the fact? Let's say he does end up losing, George Bush ends up losing because of this recount. Can you come back and say I was harmed by a flawed process?
You can say one of two things. If you don't get the injunction, but the case is still in place, you can argue that your voting rights are devalued. If you're completely thrown out, you can go to the appeals court.
So, Diane, in this conference call, they're talking about their legal strategy. They will file this tonight, or is this simply what they will come out with tomorrow when they go into the
No, they say that this is what Professor Larry Tribe of Harvard will say in court tomorrow. We asked for some specific quotes from the affidavit that they say they'll get to us later if we keep it private, and they said no, they couldn't give us any direct quotes. I wonder, too, how likely is it if Bush loses tomorrow that he can, or rather will go to state court? What do you think about that possibility?
Well, that's going to be a political decision, and I don't know if they necessarily will. That's something that only the Bush camp can answer.
It is an extraordinary development as we continue watching this legal showdown that is evolving here. It's as if lawyers can decide the election. You and I know they can't, but in one respect they may if the judge simply says enough. I'm not going to deal with this. He may very well, and I suppose the Gore people would probably ask for him to just right there at the bench shoo this away.
Right, because the interest isn't served by the manual recounts perhaps being reported, but then ultimately being invalidated by a judge. It just adds more confusion to the process.
All right, John, we appreciate you being here and help us understand this. If you're just joining us again, Diane Diamond listening in on a conference call with the Gore team, talking to reporters, laying out how they will respond to tomorrow when they go into court, federal court in Tallahassee, to deal with the injunction request by the Bush camp that those manual recounts, one of which is already underway, be stepped aside, and they strictly wait for the absentee ballots from overseas to decide this election. We'll be back with more coverage on MSNBC after this short break.
The Washington Post says MSNBC's election night coverage rocked all night thanks to Chris Matthews. Find out why. Watch Hardball, weeknights 5 Eastern on MSNBC.
If you're considering laser vision correction, here's great news. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy the superior results of LASIK Plus laser vision correction for $999. That's $999 per eye just by calling this number. What's more important, only LASIK Plus offers these 3 big pluses. 1. Only LASIK Plus offers a lifetime of better sight with the exclusive Ultra 2020 system featuring the state-of-the-art VisX Star 2 laser. 2. For almost a decade, LASIK Plus board-certified doctors have performed over 80,000 laser vision corrections. 3. LASIK Plus is affordable. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy a lifetime of better sight for as little as $999. No one can match all the pluses of LASIK Plus, so call now to take advantage of this limited time offer. 1-888-529-2020. That's 1-888-529-2020. LASIK Plus Vision Centers. You deserve a lifetime of better sight.
America's crisis of the count, 184,000 ballots being counted by hand. You want to talk tedious? Look at what the folks are doing inside this room. A live picture from Volusia County, Florida. More possible recounts, hand recounts in the offing. Are we any closer to electing a president? No doubt you are tuning in to find the answer to that question. And unfortunately, I can't tell you we are any closer. Welcome back to MSNBC's continuing election coverage. I'm Lester Holt. We've got a lot to tell you about in this half hour, a story that continues to change even throughout the weekend. Let's get you up to speed on the very latest. Officials in Volusia County, Florida have begun that hand recount. 184,000 votes cast there. It's expected to take several days. They have to complete it by Tuesday night. You heard a moment ago, though, the Gore folks are going to ask that deadline be extended. Meantime, a manual recount in Palm Beach County will be expanded from selected precincts to the entire county. Now, officials there are going to meet tomorrow to decide how they want to proceed. And perhaps most importantly, a federal court hearing will be held in Miami tomorrow in which a judge will consider an injunction filed by the Bush camp to stop the hand recounts in Florida. To put the post-election battle for the White House in some perspective, MSNBC's Hardball host Chris Matthews joins us here in the MSNBC newsroom. Nice to have you here. You have a special coming up in about a half hour.
2 hours.
But let's talk about it. Has the Bush camp put themselves in a position they can't step back from now?
Well, they may end up losing both the court battle, which I think they will lose based on precedent, and I think they're going to lose the public relations battle because they're trying to stop people's votes from being counted. That always looks bad.
We saw that sample recount they did in Palm Beach, in which I think they found a difference of 19 in a handful of precincts.
Out of 10,000.
Right, and if you extrapolate that over the entire county...
Do your algebra, and you come to about 800 votes in that county alone, and if I were Jimmy Baker, I'd be thinking, here's hell, right here. Right here, I'm going to lose. This is the Palm Beach story. I'm going to lose the election in Palm Beach.
And that's why they're in court.
That's why they're in court. If they thought let's face it, let's look at it this way. If James A. Baker III thought he was going to win in that recount, he would not be calling it off. Is that too complicated? I think it's pretty simple.
But he had two options. He had two options. He could have, and I don't see where he can do both now. He went in and said it's unconstitutional, or he could have said, you know what, we're heading to some Republican counties, and we want to do a recount there.
Well, two problems. One is Republicans have been arguing for ever since Reagan, and certainly before that, during the Taft era, for local government control of everything. Let the local governments do education. Let the local government set the curriculum. Keep Washington's hand out of this. Now they're bringing Washington's hand into it. That's one problem. The second is they're not as fast off the mark as the Democrats. Democrats are much more litigious. It's no surprise that the trial lawyers of this country back the Democratic Party. They love litigation. It's a party packed with ambulance chasers. They love this stuff. They love the infighting, the Machiavellian stuff. And now they got a chance to get in there and really fight it and stick it to the Republicans.
It seems to me William Daley set them up.
If the Republicans didn't get their act together to bring their suits and to get action in those counties where they think they got undercounted, they're going to lose.
William Daley set him up the other night. The other day, we had him live here. He had that news conference, came out very combative and said, we believe our guy won the popular vote nationwide. We believe he won Florida. He hung out their legal remedies, but didn't talk about it. Republicans swing in there. He set him up.
Yeah. He made it look like we're the dirty dogs. We're going to go in there and play it dirty. And then he met the other guys be waspy and superior, like we don't do that sort of thing. We don't dirty our hands by bringing lawyers into this matter. Well, they didn't bring the lawyers in, and they'll wish they had. That's their problem. They thought they were better than the Democrats, and it just turns out they're weaker and slower than the Democrats. That's the problem I think we're going to see here. This is hardball. The old expression hardball comes from the phrase, politics ain't beanbag. This ain't beanbag. You're into power games here, and the team that's got the fastest off the mark ability, the smartest guys, the toughest guys with the most candle power are going to win these fights. It's not about exactly who's right and who's wrong. It's more about who can prove they're right.
Are we making too much of this whole New Mexico and Iowa and Wisconsin situation in Oregon?
Well, New Mexico's worth 5 electoral votes, and it switched from the Gore column to the Bush column. It's done them no good because it's not going to get them 270. If they can pull together Wisconsin, Oregon, or Iowa plus New Mexico, they can win this thing. That's a hell of a road to hoe. They got to win Wisconsin. You know, if they'd won some of these states November 7th, they wouldn't have the problem right now. In terms of the count, of course, you could say if Gore had carried his own state, his own congressional district, he would have had at least 11 electoral votes. He wouldn't have to go through this nonsense. Neither one of these guys captivated the imagination of the American people.
How would you like to write
that's why they're in this situation.
How would you like to
They both lost the election.
How would you like to write the acceptance speech for either one of these guys?
Thank you, half of America, for voting for me.
Hey, what do you say?
Almost half. I'd have to say that I'm going to form a unity government and name a lot of guys from the other party, women from the other party into my government.
So you buy this whole centrist thing?
I think they're going to have to do it because the American people have split down the middle in the Senate, exactly, almost. They've split down the middle in the House, almost exactly, and they've split down the middle on the United States presidency, which tells me they don't want to give either party power. They want to keep both parties checked by the other party. They're not in love with either of these guys. You're not talking here about Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan or Ike here, or Roosevelt, certainly. You're talking about two middleweights fighting for a heavyweight championship, and neither guy was qualified to win it.
Special edition of Hardball coming up at 8 o'clock Eastern, 2 hours. What do you got?
We got this.
You got this.
We got ground zero. We're going to go like a set of Chinese boxes. What's happening in Palm Beach County? What's happening in Volusia County? What's happening in those 4 counties? What's happening statewide? What's happening nationwide? What's the news headline going to be tomorrow morning? What's it going to be Friday night? And what's this mean historically? And what are the precedents for this incredible event in our history, which I don't call a crisis, by the way. I think it's a great example of democracy. And with Kenneth Kalwunda, as I said before, the president of a country that never had a second party, just had one party for about 30 years. He never faced a re-election challenge. To him to make fun of the fact that we have a close election going on is missing the point. Sure, there's a lot of jealous people in the world that wish they were the United States. But the fact of the matter is, it's a close election. It's a draw. And Americans don't like draws. That's why we're frustrated. But we're going to have to get a winner out of this. And there's going to be a lot of agony to defeat. There's going to be a little sense of triumph. But I'll tell you, the agony is going to be worse. Because there's not going to be much sense of triumph. Because whoever squeaks this out is not going to look like a hero.
No, there's no way at this point.
Napoleon once said, the only victory in love is to walk away. I think he's right.
All right, Chris Matthews, we'll see you in a little less than a half hour with a special edition of Hardball. You know, they built these nice sets, all we do is sit on top of them. Go figure. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more coverage of Decision 2000, the battle for the White House, after this break. Is 255 for Gore, 246 for Bush. Neither candidate has the 270 needed for victory. Now, you're no doubt aware that the art of projecting states and wins is not a perfect one. Tuesday night certainly showed that, and the networks became the butt of a little fun from SNL, Saturday Night Live last night. In this clip, they take a shot at another network and a different approach in calling races. Watch. Oh, poking a little fun at the networks and our difficulties, shall we say, last Tuesday night with the projections. That's Saturday Night Live. In case you didn't watch last night, they had a lot of great bits poking fun at the situation we find ourselves in. And the situation we find ourselves in, Nora O'Donnell, is really a legal battle. We had a campaign, then we had an election on Tuesday, and now we're going to court.
Now we have a legal fight. At 7 o'clock tonight, electronically, the Gore campaign filed its response to the Republicans who are seeking, of course, to block the manual recounting in these 4 counties in particular. Top Gore legal advisor says that they make their argument on this count. They believe that the injunction that the Bush campaign seeks violates the fundamental rules of federalism. They believe that such election rules should not be, this type of a thing should not be fought out in the federal courts, but instead the state courts. If, of course, the Gore campaign or the Bush campaign loses, there's the possibility for appeal to the 11th Circuit and also to the Supreme Court as well, although a Gore official says tonight we do not expect to lose. This is, of course, very significant as this legal battle heats up. We can tell you now who the attorneys are going to be for each side. Very powerful attorneys. Each team has someone that is nationally well known, and then someone who's well known in Florida, well in the community. So let's start off first. We can tell you who the Gore lawyers are. Lawrence Tribe, who has signed this response today that was filed at 7 o'clock tonight. Of course, a Harvard University law professor, constitutional scholar, has been mentioned as a Supreme Court nominee himself, and I think many people remember him as leading the fight against Robert Bork, of course, who was not appointed to the Supreme Court. The Florida member of the Gore team, of course, is Kendall Coffey. Many people remember him just very recently as representing the Miami relatives in the Elian Gonzalez case. Also, on a legal basis, he was known as throwing out in terms of election law, the Miami mayoral election down there. So he has worked specifically on election fraud. He's also part of the Gore team. Now, the Bush lawyers include Ted Olson, former Assistant Attorney General in the Reagan administration. He's also known as a close friend of Ken Starr, well known in the conservative circles, and he is representing the Bush team. Also, George Terwilliger, and he, of course, was the former U.S. Attorney for Vermont and a Deputy U.S. Attorney General in the Bush administration. They have one of Florida's leading constitutional lawyers on their team, Barry Richard. And Ben Ginsberg, many people know in Washington, was the former legal counsel for the RNC and has been the top legal counsel for the Bush campaign. This is the whole heap of lawyers. This is the dream team from each of these sides that are expected to be there 9:30 tomorrow morning in Miami-Dade as they go to court about these 4 particular counties, whether those manual recounts will continue.
Now, Diane Dimond was on a conference call a while ago and understands that one of the things they'll be asking for is to extend those deadlines. You were telling me about these deadlines that the vote has to be certified in these counties. They want to go past that.
The Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, has said she will keep that deadline Tuesday at 5 p.m. where all of these counties must report to her.
After all in-hand counting.
And that she could come out, she's been saying that she could come out with vote totals on Thursday evening. The Gore campaign believing that that's not fair, that these counties need more time to do those manual recounts. They're time-consuming, they're tedious, and that they need more time than Tuesday at 5 p.m. If that Secretary of State keeps that rule, it could prevent some of these counties and their manual recounts from coming in with those final numbers that may be favorable to Al Gore.
Because the question is, if you're 2/3 of the way through the count, but you're not finished, do any of those other ones count, or is the whole thing thrown out? And I guess that's what the Democrats are worried about.
Absolutely, and that will be part of the discussion tomorrow as well as through the week.
All right, Nora O'Donnell with new developments in this changing story. You know, this election has to be just killing Bush and Gore, but guess who's loving all this? Yeah, the folks at Saturday Night Live. Their irreverent take on the battle of the ballot. More of it coming up.
I'm this close to having teenage girls throw their panties at me.
I told my father I wanted to grow up to be a teacher. Wouldn't you rather be a doctor? He said. It's a noble profession and you could become wealthy. That may be true, I said. But without teachers, where would doctors come from?
across the sea, and lingered there to touch your hair and walk.
The all-new Lexus LS 430. Imagine how you'll feel driving it.
Is your internet slowing you down? Get Telocity high-velocity internet and push the play button on life.
You ain't seen nothing yet. It's something that you're never gonna forget.
This is Telocity high-velocity DSL internet service. Experience the net like never before.
Baby, you just ain't seen nothing yet.
Call now and get free activation with no annual contract at 1-800-Telocity.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
If you're considering laser vision correction, here's great news. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy the superior results of LASIK Plus laser vision correction for $999. That's $999 per eye just by calling this number. What's more important, only LASIK Plus offers these three big pluses.
1.
Only LASIK Plus offers a lifetime of better sight with the exclusive Ultra 2020 system featuring the state-of-the-art VisX Star 2 laser.
2.
For almost a decade, LASIK Plus board-certified doctors have performed over 80,000 laser vision corrections.
3.
LASIK Plus is affordable. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy a lifetime of better sight for as little as $999. No one can match all the pluses of LASIK Plus, so call now to take advantage of this limited time offer. 1-888-529-2020. That's 1-888-529-2020. LASIK Plus Vision Centers. You deserve a lifetime of better sight.
It's good to pull some humor out of this Decision 2000. They're getting a lot of mileage from this, aren't they? We've been showing you the clips from Saturday Night Live, but cartoonists are pointing their drawing pencils to politics also. Jim Morin is a political cartoonist of the Miami Herald. He joins us now from Miami. And Jim, you've been having your own fun with this ballot as well. We've got one of them right here on our screen.
Good evening. Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? I just can't believe it.
This, we're looking at one, or we're about to look at one of the pieces you did. It's the new ballot design, and it makes it clear that if you want to vote for Al Gore, punch here, fool, Gore this way, dummy. What was your point?
Well, you know, the point is that it's so easy to figure out. I mean, there are some people I really do feel sorry for. A Holocaust survivor who voted for Pat Buchanan. I really feel for them, but it's just so simple, and voting is a responsibility, and it's not that difficult a thing. I can't understand it because this is a country, we won more gold medals in Australia a few months ago than any country on earth. We have the most coordinated athletes, but we can't figure out a voting card. It's ridiculous. Maybe we should make it an Olympic sport.
Jim, this has got to be a cartoonist's dream, a story like this. Certainly, maybe crisis is too big a word. I mean, certainly we are a nation in turmoil, but for a cartoonist, you got to be loving this.
I don't know. Well, you know, I'm loving it on one hand. The problem is that sometimes when you get something that is so crazy, what we do is we take reality and we show you how silly it is. But when you get silliness, there isn't much more that we can do with it. It's hard to satirize something that is comical itself.
Let's show the viewers one you did. Florida recounts its ballots, and we see a guy and the dog and a wheelbarrow, and they're in the counting room surrounded by ballots. And looks like confusion there. What's your point on this one?
Right. Well, the point was, so first of all, that really gets my point through, that I drew this long before that we had this hand recount in Palm Beach County. And I drew that cartoon when we just started recounting the ballots. The state started recounting the ballots. And if you look at the reality of it, you have a table with 3 people counting each and every ballot, and in back of them there's a window with this media horde behind them shooting it with their TV cameras, and that's about 10 times sillier than anything I drew.
Well, as you know, a lot of cartoonists have been having a field day with this situation. We've got some work of some other folks who have, certainly Florida has found its way in the news a lot in the last year, the Elian Gonzalez, and this is one the Hartford Courant did with the Florida taking up most of the United States, or all of the United States. Does it feel that way sometimes?
Well, I'll tell you, when this happened, the Banana Republic joke started flying, and it's really not the same thing. Palm Beach County is just about an hour away from us, but in many ways it's a world away. It's a totally different place. And also, what Miami went through was really voter fraud. It was fraud with absentee ballots. And here, there is no fraud. It's just a lot of gross incompetence, as I can see it, from the people who designed the ballots and approved it, and then the people who voted with them.
Jim Warren, we appreciate you spending some time with us. Enjoy your work.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. We're going to take a break, and as we take a break, take a look at this other one that was done by Mike Collins of taterbrains.com, another official Florida presidential ballot. We'll be back in a moment on MSNBC.
On election night, more people watched MSNBC than ever before. According to the Washington Post, MSNBC's coverage rocked all night thanks to Chris Matthews. USA Today named Brian Williams best anchor and called our coverage the night's liveliest broadcast. Wall-to-wall coverage. Decision 2000, too close to call. MSNBC, the whole picture.
No two eyes see the same world. No two businesses are identical. And now, one company creates internet solutions unique to you.
Fujitsu. The possibilities are infinite.
You're about to see something special. Introducing the 2001 Buick Century Special Edition. Luxury, quality, the little buzz you get from driving it. The 2001 Century Special Edition is all that and less. $1,250 less right now. Make your neighbors jealous. Make your children proud. Come see something special. Come see your Buick dealer today.
I wasted way too much time being fat. I would go up and down and up and down. Look at me. I lost over 50 pounds on this Slim Fast plan, and I kept it off for over 3 years. I didn't know I looked like this underneath. It's not only about being thin, it's about feeling good and having energy. I exercise, I eat right. I have a shake for lunch every day. It helps me stay this way. If you know your ABCs, you know the vitamins in Slim Fast. It's a fun way of rejuvenating your body.
Slim Fast, every day. Get healthy.
It can happen to you.
Samsung joyfully introduces the world as you make it, where our digital technology has one job: to make life more fun. We want to thrill you, connect you, charm you, satisfy you, and delight you.
Everyone's invited
To the Samsung digital experience.
That wraps up our coverage for this hour, but you'll want to stay with MSNBC for a special 2-hour edition of Hardball with Chris Matthews. That's coming up next. And remember to wake up with I Miss in the morning beginning at 6 Eastern in our continuing coverage of the battle for the White House. And live coverage of all the day's developments, the first being that federal hearing at 9:30 in the morning in Miami. And we'll be covering that for you, so keep it here for complete coverage of the battle for the White House. We leave you tonight with those jokesters over at Saturday Night Live putting a groove together for Gore. So long.
Hey, what are you putting in over there?
DirecTV system.
Satellite, huh? I already got like 70 cable channels.
Well, this thing can get over 225 if you want them, all 100% digital quality.
It's on. It's on. It's unbelievable. I have a riding mower.
That's great, sir.
Now get free professional installation when you buy a DirecTV system and sign up for Total Choice programming.
Can you imagine a world where you can take your shade with you? We can. An automatic rear sunshade. Just one of the many innovations you'll find within the sanctuary of the Infiniti i30. It's all the best thinking.
The votes were tallied on election night. Governor Bush won.
We've had a full automatic recount. Since that time, Governor Bush won.
And this is not a procedure that's peculiar to Florida. Many states in the Union have hand counts to check recount.
Good evening, I'm Chris Matthews, and this is Hardball. Tonight, the battle over this election is headed to the courts. When the weekend began, the automatic count in Florida was over, and according to the Associated Press, George W. Bush led Al Gore by 327 votes. The next step, a manual recount demanded by the Gore campaign in 4 Florida counties: Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, Broward, and Volusia, all counties that are heavily Democratic. Then on Saturday morning, a new development: the first lawsuit filed by a campaign arguing that a manual recount would be less fair and less accurate than the machine count that had just concluded. Bush advisor James Baker announced that Republicans would seek to stop the hand count with a court injunction. The Democrats were quick to respond. Gore advisor Warren Christopher vowed to fight the injunction, saying if Governor Bush truly believes he has won the election in Florida, he should not have any reason to fear or to doubt the new count. A federal court will hear arguments tomorrow morning. Also this weekend, more signs that this fight could spread. George Bush now has a 17-vote lead in New Mexico, a state that had been called for Al Gore. And the Republicans could also challenge slim margins in Iowa, Oregon, and Wisconsin. For now, though, the center of the struggle is Florida, where the hand counting has been going on all day in Volusia County. NBC's Jim Cummings is there.
Hi, Chris. That's right. The deadline for counting all 184,000 ballots by hand is 5 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. That's when the state of Florida will certify this election. But Volusia County officials say that's probably not enough time for them, so they are going into court tomorrow to file a lawsuit to extend that deadline. Here's why. 44 county employees, 2 to a table, examine each ballot while a Democrat and a Republican look over their shoulders to make sure the ballot is correctly marked and counted. All this under the watchful eyes of armed sheriff's deputies, jail guards, and state police, and a surveillance camera on the ballots that are still in the bags.
We've asked you that you not have on the table anything other than the materials that you'll be working with, of course, including the ballots.
This recount, which began 24 hours late, has no written instructions, but the people in charge here insist it will be okay.
This process is something that we've never done before, and it'll get more organized as things go along.
But Republican Party leaders doubt it, calling the manual recount chaotic.
We had a vote on election night. We've had another recount as the Secretary of State ordered under law. Now we're getting into sort of an endless fishing expedition with no set of rules.
Democrats disagree.
I believe it's that last stage of making sure it was done right and is totally accurate and the people know their votes being counted.
Volusia County is primarily a bedroom community that sits between Orlando and the east coast of Florida. It's 85% white, 9% black, and 5% Hispanic. The Democrats asked for a manual recount here because Volusia County has a history of election snafus. This year, somebody found 83 unmarked ballots after the polls closed in a precinct won by Vice President Gore.
Florida Department of Law Enforcement provided a preliminary report to the canvassing board and basically assured the canvassing board that they feel confident that these ballots were not ballots that were cast in the election.
The ones that were take an average of 5 to 7 seconds to recount by hand, 184,000 of them. That's why county officials are going into court Monday, seeking more time to count them. Vice President Gore defeated Governor Bush by about 15,000 votes here in Volusia County. The mechanical recount confirmed that, and county officials are confident that the manual recount will do the same, Chris.
Let me ask you, is there any evidence watching body language or expressions on faces or wrangling, if there has been any new Gore votes turned up in Volusia?
Absolutely not. There's some absolutely perfect poker faces inside these rooms behind me here. All they're doing is just picking up ballots, nodding, and putting them on piles. They're putting them on 3 different piles, and then they take the ones that are questionable and take them over to the canvassers who go over them, and they have the same poker faces as they go over those. It appears that most of the questionable ballots are being counted. Whether they were counted in the first place, we just don't know. But I can tell you, they are going through this count faster than expected. They've gone through 110 precincts today in 10 hours. There are 173 overall. But we've run the numbers on this, and so far those are mostly small precincts. The big ones are yet to come.
So it could be a day or two.
Yes, it could.
Thank you very much, Jim Cummins of NBC News. Now let's go to NBC's Campbell Brown, who's with the Bush campaign in Austin. Campbell, thanks for joining us. It seems to me go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, we just haven't seen Governor Bush at all today. It's actually been quiet here in Austin because everything, as you know, is going on down in Florida. He says he's here working on transition. And as you know, we got this photo op yesterday with Bush and Dick Cheney and Andy Card, who's expected to be White House Chief of Staff. But what was interesting, even though he is acting like the outcome here is not in question, interestingly today, Don Evans, who is the chairman of the Bush campaign, sent out a letter to supporters, a fundraising letter asking for contributions to help them with the recount effort. And clearly here now, Chris, suggesting that nobody thinks this is going to be quick, easy, or cheap. And I think we're getting the sense now that they're pretty aggressively working on their plan B, getting ready for the very distinct possibility this judge could rule against them and agree that the hand counts are valid. And then they have to figure out where to go from there. They have a couple of options. First and foremost, to appeal the decision. And while they haven't said they're going to do that definitively, it's certainly likely that they would. And then also ask for recounts in some of these Republican counties. And finally, to ask for recounts in those states you talked about at the beginning of the show, where there are very slim margins: Wisconsin, Iowa, Oregon, and possibly New Mexico, if it turns out that Gore eventually gets New Mexico back. So a lot of options on the table. They don't want it to get to that point. And James Baker, who's representing Bush, was out on the Sunday morning talk shows today arguing that this should end and that the hand count should not be held valid. Here was Baker today on Meet the Press.
They're going to keep asking for recount after recount after recount till they're satisfied with the result, and they want these recounts to be in the counties where they have these huge margins. Well, that's simply not fair, and we don't think, frankly, under this procedure, that it's constitutional.
Now, Bush is due back here in Austin, Chris, Monday morning. He's going to have some meetings at the mansion with his advisors and a photo op where he is expected to take questions from reporters. He's probably not going to talk too much about what's going on in Florida. He's been referring all that to Baker, trying to stay above the fray, or at least create the appearance of being above the fray.
Thank you very much, Campbell Brown, who's in Austin. Tonight, Vice President Al Gore is in Washington. NBC's Chip Reed is there. Chip, is there a sense of glee on the part of the Gore people that their lawyers got the jump by calling for the recounts in the 4 Democratic counties, while the Republicans, led by Jim Baker, haven't been able to even get their act together to call for recounts in that 72-hour period that was requisite here to get the kind of recounts they might need in the Republican areas?
I wouldn't call it glee, because even though they really do feel that they got the jump, and it's going to be very hard for the other side to now go out and request hand counts in other Republican counties in Florida because they've been arguing so hard against them, they do feel that they certainly have the upper hand here, and they're headed toward a lead later in this week, and then we'll have to see what the Bush forces do. You know, it was all talk shows today. Both candidates, Gore didn't really show himself. He went to church, but that was it. Didn't have anything to say. So it was Warren Christopher and Bill Daley on TV talking about it all, and let's listen to Warren Christopher a little bit, explaining why he thinks it would be such a sad day if they don't get to do these recounts.
We're doing this in an expeditious manner. We want to get it over with as soon as we possibly can. But wouldn't it be tragic if it turned out that the wrong man had been chosen here because we didn't follow the procedures of Florida law? I think we're on the right side of this issue in this time period we're in right now.
But, Chris, I think one reason they're not gleeful, even though they think they're really heading in the right direction here, is, first of all, it's unpredictable. Who knows where it goes? But second, even if they win, it's going to look like they did it by good lawyering and legal maneuvering and such, and that's not the way anybody wants to win a presidential election. Your
hunch, if they don't do it by the numbers, will they go to court and try to get a revote in Palm Beach County?
It's really hard to say at this point. You know, they understand how negatively that would be received by the American people. They certainly haven't ruled it out, and if it's their only option, they just might do it. But I think at this point, they think that this recount by hand is going to give them a pretty good lead.
Thank you very much. Chip Reed is with the Vice President. Tomorrow morning, a federal judge will hear arguments on whether to let Florida's manual recount proceed. We're joined now from Miami by Attorney Alan Fine and from Tallahassee by Ron Lebowski, General Counsel of the Florida State Association of Election Supervisors. Gentlemen, thank you very much. A lot of people took a breather over the weekend. They may have watched the morning shows like Meet the Press, but they really want to get up to date. Let's bring them up to date. And I want to start with this simple fact. Like Chinese boxes, let's begin with Palm Beach and work our way out through Florida to the nation. In Palm Beach County, I'm told that the recount of the 10,000 sample ballots yielded a net Gore advantage of 19 votes, which allowed the local election officials to make the decision to go ahead and do a complete recount of the 450,000 votes cast on November 7th in Palm Beach County. Alan Fine, you start. What does that 19 number tell you? What's its significance?
Well, Chris, what's significant about that number is that there and in all counties where these punch ballots are used, you lose approximately 33 votes out of every 1,000. 33 show up as marked no vote.
Right.
And most of those are Gore counties, or most of the votes there are Gore counties. So if you do a broad recount, manual recount, Gore's going to win by several thousand votes, I believe. And I think one morning this weekend the Republicans woke up and realized that.
You mean just in that county?
Not just in that county.
And just in the county, my algebra tells me if it's 19 out of 10,000, it would be about 800 out of 450,000. That's just the usual old, freshman year high school algebra tells you that.
Right.
Where did you get your thousands of numbers? That's from all 4 counties.
Well, even if you were to do a statewide recount, which the Bush people are saying, well, why just these counties? If you did more counties, you would get more votes.
Do you think that the Republicans blew it by not calling for a recount in those Republican counties as fast as the Democrats, led by Warren Christopher and Bill Daley, called for recounts in the 4 Democratic counties?
I don't think so, because at the end of the day, if they had recounts in every county, it's because of where these punch ballots were used.
Yeah.
The end result is going to be a Gore victory of several thousand votes, I believe.
That's something we really have to explain. Ron Lebowski, we're talking about technology here. I understand today, doing the homework on this, that in several of these counties where they use those punch cards like we've used in the District of Columbia for all these years, they tend to have this problem with the little shard that's left over that doesn't get pushed all the way off the card and sometimes causes the vote not to be counted. What is it about the pattern here where the Democratic districts tend to have that machinery and the Republican-leaning districts don't?
Well, Chris, I don't think it's got anything to do with the politics of the situation. It just happens to do with who decided to buy what technology at what point in time. Clearly, the punch card systems have been around longer than the optical scan, and it's really just been a question of a decision between the supervisor of elections and the local county government of when they feel it's necessary to buy a new election system.
But
so
hasn't that been a handicap to those communities to be able to not to be able to get their entire vote counted, to have this regular flow of disallowed ballots because of the machinery not being able to pick up 100% of the votes?
Well, I think that when the machinery or the mechanics are sold, it's acknowledged by the vendors. I think it's a fair representation that they're not going to pick up every vote. That hanging chad that you've described is a characteristic of those punch card systems, and the systems have always been known to do that. And I think that one of the reasons that we have in our statutes, in our law, a manual recount is to not necessarily acknowledge that with respect to this system, but just to acknowledge that the machines are not perfect. And then it's a question of whether you view the machines to be more perfect or if you view humans and their evaluation to be a better acknowledgement of what may have happened with that.
Jim Baker, the advocate,
that's all what's going on.
The advocate for Governor Bush, James A. Baker III, said that he felt that machines were better at counting votes than people. Do you agree?
Machines are better at counting those votes that have been able to be processed through the machine the way the machine has been programmed. I think it may very well turn out to be a question of, do you trust machines more than you trust human beings? I think our system has been designed to say we acknowledge that those machines may not pick up some votes, and the way we will try to ascertain that is this manual recount.
Let's talk about the technology.
We have laws written that way.
Alan, do both of you think it's fair to go with the sunlight rule or this other rule where you make sure that at least one is if you can see through the hole, that means somebody tried to perforate the hole. The other one, this other standard, I'm not sure what the other one is, but tell me how you decide whether somebody cast a vote or not, Alan, on a punch card.
Well, there are a number of different ways of doing it, and certainly once there's at least one perforation made, I think the question is over. I think that obviously.
Do you agree with that, Ron?
Yeah, I think once the perforation is made.
Yeah.
Well, on those punch cards, a hole is a hole. It's just a question of whether the hole got fully punched out.
Okay, what's going to happen tomorrow, Ron? Do you think who's going to win the case in court? Who's going to will the Jim Baker forces be able to get this stopped, this hand count stopped in Palm Beach and other counties?
I would be real surprised if the judge makes a decision tomorrow. I would expect that what will happen is the judge will get the lay of the land, figure out who all the parties are, where we're going to go with this.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Ron, both for joining us. Very nice to join us on Sunday especially. Up next, historians Doug Brinkley and Robert Dowling put all this turmoil in historic perspective.
The deciding vote was Teresa LaPone, who is the same person who designed the butterfly ballot. She's an elected Democrat. She wants to get reelected. That is a blatant conflict of interest. The one person who's decided this race is the person who screwed up so badly that she has to redeem herself in the eyes of the voters.
It's the law.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I think that if you go and look at the fact that they changed the standards on that recount twice in the course of 5...
explain that now for the audience right now who was
they started out by saying if we hold it up to the light,
the sunlight test,
we have one thing.
That's if you perforated the Gore spot in any way that the light could show through it, you voted for Gore.
Right.
What's the second test that you applied later?
Then it was more or less if the thing is is almost completely off.
Right.
Almost
the piece of paper, the shard or whatever it's called.
And by the way, the more you handle these ballots, the more you suffer ballot fatigue, which is more of these things fall off, the more you rifle them like a stack of cards. Then the third test finally was.
But isn't that fair? Let's not be too sarcastic.
I
isn't
am
it
being
okay?
sarcastic.
No, if somebody pushed through a hole and it didn't go all the way through and a piece of cardboard falls out of a ballot, that was the intention of the voter clearly. Even if it falls out through lots of handling, you can't create a hole by handling something.
Let me tell you.
Less public support for not going ahead with this recount than there is for saying, well, these chads may not be done properly. I don't think that argument rings well with people. I think that
Did you watch the actual recount coverage on this
yes,
network?
Well,
the people that make the machines say that these are bad machines and that indeed the Chad test is a legitimate one.
But okay, I think democracy is still a good selling point. We'll be right back with Carl Bernstein, Tamala Edwards of Time Magazine, and John Fund of the Wall Street Journal. You're watching Hardball. This is a special edition of Hardball.
I specialize in pain.
Again?
An office job can be torture. All that clicking, typing, and reaching can lead to serious injuries.
Again?
I'm Dr. Michelle Robertson, ergonomic research expert for Liberty Mutual Insurance. By studying the problems, we help design ergonomic work environments to keep your employees working comfortably.
At Liberty Mutual, we help make your business safer and more secure. It's insurance in action.
Isn't science fun?
Where do you find inspiration? What if the things you do every day could be done with tools so instinctive, using them would be like riding a bike? If technology became your silent partner, imagine what you could imagine. We believe it's time to move beyond information technology to inspiration technology. Welcome to the new IT from Compaq.
The true car of the future is the one that helps ensure we have a future. Introducing the new Toyota Prius. Part gas, part electric, totally cordless.
Hi, I'm Phil Mickelson, and I give my best tips only in Golf Digest.
Call now for Golf Digest and get your first issue risk-free. That's 12 issues for only $19.77, including this pocket tips booklet and this free instructional video. Call 800-391-0707. That's 800-391-0707.
If you're considering laser vision correction, here's great news. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy the superior results of LASIK Plus laser vision correction for $999. That's $999 per eye just by calling this number. What's more important, only LASIK Plus offers these three big pluses.
1.
Only LASIK Plus offers a lifetime of better sight with the exclusive Ultra 20/20 system featuring the state-of-the-art VisX Star 2 laser.
2.
For almost a decade, LASIK Plus board-certified doctors have performed over 80,000 laser vision corrections.
3.
LASIK Plus is affordable. Now, for a limited time, you can enjoy a lifetime of better sight for as little as $999. No one can match all the pluses of LASIK Plus, so call now to take advantage of this limited time offer. 1-888-529-2020. That's 1-888-529-2020. LASIK Plus Vision Centers. You deserve a lifetime of better sight.
Back here having our own ballot recount with Carl Bernstein, Tamala Edwards, and John Fund. You were saying about the way you say that just merely passing cards around, fingering them, messing them up somehow creates what?
It can create holes. It can weaken holes. Every time you handle the
I'm going to
ballots,
give you a card for an hour, and you can play with it all you want. It's not going to create a hole in it.
I have done it. You can.
He's fixed elections.
I literally
before.
watched a recount in California where the guy who was counting them rifled them like a deck of cards, and he changed the outcome of the race.
Well, I think we know that there are so many people
treat
watching
them like
this
that,
vote.
they will.
Well,
That's
guess
not
what?
going to happen.
The more you handle them, the more you will get them.
I still don't see how you make a hole.
Another point. We're talking about sunshine. The real sunshine that needs to be applied here is what happened in the state of Florida in terms of keeping certain voters from the polls.
What about Oregon?
And,
what about Minnesota?
I
what
agree.
about Wisconsin?
Well, that's fine.
That's the
But
question,
big
whether
question-
African Americans were intimidated.
We haven't heard allegations yet at the same level that we heard about Florida.
There are some 20,000 or 19,000 complaints that many of them sound very credible. And the question, and the reason we see the Bush campaign pushing for a quick end to this is they don't want these to come to light.
Do you think there's voter suppression here?
I think that there are certainly very strong suggestions that people were turned away from the polls, that they were not permitted to vote because they didn't have a certain kind of ID and they were identified as blacks. From people I've talked to,
you know this history. You know this history of voter suppression. You get guys with, perhaps some guys with shady criminal records. They're afraid to show up. They don't like a lot of sunlight.
Black college students were turned.
No, that's
Well, I mean, yeah, I think
they shouldn't have been afraid of the police, though.
Well, I think it's less a question of were people with felony records allowed to vote or not. I think it's a question of black people showing up at ballots and that there are intimidating officers there asking for ID, saying, or telling them there are no more ballots, or telling them that the polls
I've never heard of a cop showing up at a voting booth and asking for your ID.
May I intrude a fact?
Have you?
Blacks are 14% of the voting age population in Florida. They were 16% of the voters on Tuesday. That is hardly evidence of voter suppression.
But
They outperformed.
No, the statistics. She's absolutely right, John. That's silly.
Larger numbers
John,
means
that's
that
silly.
they could
No, wait a second.
from voting. I mean,
You have no facts. You have no. Give me the name of a voter who says they were intimidated.
Pick up
I want
New
the
York
name.
Times,
Well, let
pick
me
up the
tell you.
Washington
You don't have any names.
Pick up
I
most
have the fact that they
major
turned out in greater numbers than they ever have in the history of the state.
Tamala, you have some facts. Present them.
I'll give you a name of someone making the allegation.
Tamala's turn. She has something to report here.
Well, I think within the few days after the election, the nation's best investigative reporters were put on the ground in Florida, many of whom wrote stories from people saying, for these different reasons, I wasn't allowed to go to the polls. And obviously, I covered the Gore campaign, and they could shape the news in certain ways, but we were hearing all day about reports coming in that different people were not allowed to come to the polls. And it wasn't just the campaign. There were reporters in the Gore press corps who were saying, I was turned away from the poll. Or
me what you did for my birthday. Just ask me.
W. Bush led Al Gore by 327 votes. The next step, a manual recount demanded by the Gore campaign in 4 Florida counties, all heavily Democratic. Then on Saturday morning, a new development. Bush advisor James A. Baker announced that Republicans would seek to stop that hand count with a court injunction. The Democrats vowed to fight back, and a federal judge will hear arguments tomorrow morning. Also this weekend, more signs that the fight could spread. George Bush now has a 17-point lead in New Mexico, a state that had been called for Al Gore, and the Republicans could also challenge slim margins in Iowa, Oregon, and in Wisconsin. For now, though, the center of the struggle is still Florida. NBC's Kerry Sanders reports.
After completing the hand count of punch card ballots, the Elections Canvassing Board in Palm Beach County announced at 2 a.m. this morning, every ballot will now be recounted by hand.
And given the totality of the circumstances here, I move that this board conduct a manual recount of all the ballots for the presidential election for the year 2000.
The hand count ended just before midnight, 10.5 hours after it had begun. The ballots held up to lights, eyes focused on the punch holes. Were they for Gore, for Bush, for Buchanan? In the end, a count of 1% of the votes revealed the computers had missed 33 votes for Gore, 14 for Bush. A net result of machine and hand counts giving Gore 65 extra votes and Bush 10 extra votes, adding to Gore's lead in this county. Republicans say recounting all of Palm Beach County votes by hand is unneeded and unrealistic.
If you extrapolate the amount of time it took last night to handle 1% of the precincts in this county, where 570,000 ballots would have to be counted, a hand count in this county would take, even if they worked 24 hours around the clock, 37 days. The American people don't want to wait until 1 week before Christmas to get some finality and closure on this process.
We want
Outside the Palm Beach County Courthouse today, Republicans gather to protest the hand count of all the ballots. The fear what is happening in Palm Beach will spread statewide.
It is terrible to divide the country. I think Mr. Bush has a right, and he had the votes.
The Gore campaign says hand-counting votes is the only way to catch the computer errors. In a race where fewer than 400 votes separate Bush from Gore, hand-counting votes across most of the state is not something ruled out by the Gore campaign.
Over time and over a number of elections, we've learned that machines do make mistakes, and especially the types of technology that's involved in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties.
Thank you, Kerry Sanders. This weekend, Al Gore was home in Washington and George Bush was at his ranch in Texas. NBC's Chip Reed now reports on the candidates and what their campaigns are up to.
Arriving at church with his family Sunday.
Good morning. Hope you all have a nice Sunday.
Al Gore continued to refuse comment on the electoral battle in Florida, leaving it to his point men, William Daley and Warren Christopher, to defend the controversial hand recounts now underway.
This is the procedure called for by Florida law. Florida law provides for an opportunity for hand counts to check machine counts.
Christopher said the recounts should be completed within a matter of days. At that point, Gore campaign sources contend Gore will be in the lead in Florida and on track to win the election. Meanwhile, Governor George Bush spent the day out of public view behind the gate of his ranch in Texas, while his point man, James Baker, appeared on 5 network talk shows, arguing vigorously that the hand recounts are improper and should be stopped.
This opens up tremendous possibilities for human error, and indeed it opens up tremendous possibilities for something worse than human error and for mischief.
Bush advisors say if they lose that argument in court this week, they may appeal. And if they lose Florida, they may ask for recounts in other states where the filing deadline has not yet passed and where the vote is close, including Iowa and Wisconsin, states that could help them win even without Florida. There could also be a recount in New Mexico, where the race is a virtual tie. State police there have impounded ballots in some counties to make sure no one tampers with them before any possible recount.
The Gore team is also still considering other options, including going to court if the hand recount does not give them the lead in Florida. So while both sides say they want to move as expeditiously as possible, both are considering strategies that could cause this fight to drag on for weeks. Chip Reed, NBC News, Washington.
Prominent Democrats are weighing in on this election controversy. Former Democratic Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia has this to say in his statement this morning. Instead of bringing clarity and closure to the presidential contest, turning the decision over to lawyers and the courts will in the long run deepen public doubt about the outcome. Vice President Gore should make it clear he would concede the victory to Governor Bush if he loses Florida after the more scrupulous recount and the counting of absentee ballots. The two men who would lead America must now act in a manner worthy of the office they seek. And joining me right now on the telephone from his home in Bethesda, America, with his perspective is former Democratic Senator from Arkansas, the much-respected Dale Bumpers. Senator Bumpers, thanks for joining us on a Sunday night at the moment of this incredible point in American history. What is your thought about how these two candidates, including the Democratic candidate Al Gore, are handling this challenge?
Well, I think each candidate and their forces are doing precisely what they think is in their best interest, and they certainly have a right to do that. My only concern is that that time is going to become important. I think that the biggest stumbling block to a quick resolution of this course is the recounting of all the votes in Palm Beach. I don't blame Al Gore for asking for a recount in those 4 counties. I wouldn't blame, certainly I would think if George Bush chose to have a recount in Wisconsin, Oregon, New Mexico, he would certainly have a right to do that. But as I say, I'm not sure how you're going to count almost 500,000 votes, how you're going to count them by hand. But I don't blame Al Gore for asking for a recount. Everybody should leave the Florida officials to do the best job they can possibly do. There's no suggestion that anybody's going to perpetrate a fraud or trying to perpetrate a fraud. You can't blame either George Bush or Al Gore for doing whatever they're doing to try to make sure that they get the benefit of the doubt.
If Palm Beach County were given a chance to re-vote certainly an unprecedented, or certainly an extraordinary opportunity for any community in the country. Would that sell with the American people if Palm Beach came in with an election in 2 weeks that showed Gore building up his vote and winning enough to win the state of Florida? Would that sell with the American people?
Chris, I don't think it would. It wouldn't sell very well with me. You'd be asking people to vote on hindsight. You'd be simply saying that people of Palm Beach are going to go back to the polls. Can you imagine what chaos that would create to go back now and everybody in the country know that Palm Beach County was effectively determining who the next president of the United States should be?
You know,
I wouldn't be for that. I think it's perfectly okay to hand count the votes in that county, but they need to figure out a way to get it done as expeditiously as possible.
You know, there's an old phrase about pornography. A Supreme Court justice once says, you know it when you see it. When will Al Gore or George Bush see that they have lost and turn over the sword?
That's a very good question. When the certification by the Florida Canvassing Board is made, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. I think that if there's a substantial difference between the two, Al Gore or George Bush, either one, has a fairly good lead in Florida. And after all, once the hand count is done, there's very little else that could be done. Then at that point, I think, unless there's been, you know, a fraud someplace else or some other item has been injected into it, one of the men ought to graciously concede and point out that the country's interest is more important than any one single person.
You spent your life in elected politics as governor and as senator from Arkansas. Who would be better off, the guy who walks or the guy who stays and takes the office?
Obviously, the guy who wins and takes the office thinks he'd be better off. There, you might make a case that, for example, whoever makes a magnanimous statement, for example, if Al Gore conceded after he got a majority of the popular vote, he'd be in very good position in 2004 to say.
Well, you call him up and tell him that, because I don't think he agrees with you. Anyway, thank you very much, Senator Dale Bumpers from Arkansas. We're joined right now by our panel from Philadelphia is Democratic Congressman Chaka Fattah. Sir, thanks for joining us. From Manchester, New Hampshire, scene of the, I think that was the scene of the crime up there, former Governor John Sununu. From Washington, the National Journal, Stu Taylor. And with me is, on the set right here, is Vanity Fair's Christopher Hitchens and former Hillary Clinton press secretary Lisa Caputo. Let's start with the lawyer on the team, Stuart Taylor. Stu, this thing tomorrow morning, let's just start chronologically. Tomorrow morning in federal court, a federal judge down in Miami is going to have to decide whether to stop these hand recounts in these 4 counties. Will he do that?
I don't know if he will, but I think that by the end of the week, the Supreme Court of the United States will give a partial victory, at least, to Bush on this. And the reason I think he will, it's not exactly the argument you've heard from the Bush camp for tactical reasons. I think their best argument is to have selective hand counts only in Democratic counties, which is the way it's headed now, would clearly stack the deck in favor of Mr. Gore, because what happens in a hand count is more votes get counted, votes that were thrown out the first time. Proportionately and statistically speaking, that means if you get more votes coming in West Palm, they're probably going to be Gore votes, most of them. You could fix...
So it's a due process call. It's just saying it's unfair.
Due process and equal protection. Yeah. You could fix that, theoretically, by saying, well, let's just have hand counts anywhere Bush wants them to, or statewide. You could fix that factor. Apparently the Bush campaign doesn't want that. Maybe, I'm not sure what their tactic is. The problem with that being the remedy, in other words, instead of saying no hand counts, the court's saying either none or statewide or something like that, is, as we heard earlier, it might take until Christmas to do them statewide, particularly if it spreads to other states. And so then the courts might be faced with a very tricky issue. Well, is there a special federal interest, which we never had to weigh before, in getting a president chosen within a reasonable period of time after the election that argues that we shouldn't start down the hand count?
Well, just while we're on, Stu, while we're on this point, I just want to get the technical factor that I've learned today doing the homework on this. The reason why the Bush campaign, Jimmy Baker, may not want to have a recount in those rural or those Republican counties is they don't have the same kind of punch card system that does create this regular percentage of people that don't have their votes counted. So even if you went back to those counties, they wouldn't get the same premium that Gore's getting out of those 4 counties, which all have that punch card system, which for some idiotic reason those local governments allow. They keep allowing their voters election after election to get undercounted. John Sununu, former governor of New Hampshire, former chief of staff to President Bush, your reaction to the situation right now going into federal court tomorrow morning?
I think that one of the courts, either the federal court at this level or in the appeal process, is going to recognize that time is a factor. there is no way to count that whole state in a reasonable period, hand count that whole state in a reasonable period of time. I think they're going to draw the line on time. I think the most appropriate time to draw the line on is when there is a recount of the foreign ballots in there, and if there is not a complete hand count completed at that time, I think the courts are going to say go back to the machine count that stands.
We also face the possibility that the Secretary of State, Congressman Vitale, you responded, the Secretary of State of Florida may well decide in the next couple of days, we're getting that sort of leak out of the Gore campaign, they think it might happen, or they're saying it might happen. Suppose she simply says, we're going to certify that electronic recount from last week, and that's what's going to stand. You can count all these by hand all you want, but what I'm going with is the totals, which according to the Associated Press now, are 288 votes giving this election to Bush so far. Would that sell, do you think, Congressman?
Well, she was co-chair of the Bush campaign there, and she's already said that she's going to hold to her deadline on Tuesday. But let me say something, because I think that Stuart Taylor is absolutely right, that this issue of selective use of hand counting would be a concern. And what if she were to certify the vote without the hand counts in these Democratic areas? Then the only place that hand counts would have benefited a candidate in the state of Florida would be George Bush. Because in Seminole County, they've already used hand counting, and they've already added some 98 votes to George Bush. And this notion that somehow it's unfair for Democrats to benefit from hand counting, as Bush wins New Mexico through a hand count process, as he's gained votes in Florida through hand counts. See, the Republican Party needs to put all of its cards on the table. There's already been hand counting in Florida in Republican areas.
Let me go around to Lisa Caputo. Speaking from their perspective of having worked with these people, it seems like Gore has a very aggressive team here, and Gore is really going to punch this thing out and do what he has to do to win this thing. Go to the recount. If that doesn't work, pursue in the courts the civil rights violations, pursue the anomalous balloting for Pat Buchanan in Palm Beach County. Just keep fighting this baby till he wins it.
Well, I think there's one important thing to note, which is it was the Bush campaign who was adamant about let's not extend this process, let's not take legal action, yet they had a turn of the tables. They took the first legal action. I think it's
in fact, they're asking for federal intervention.
Federal intervention in a state matter, which is serious business. I also want to quote something out of today's New York Times in an article Lawrence Tribe wrote, which is, many who today call for avoiding a protracted presidential contest not long ago insisted that even more protracted struggle to impeach and remove our head of state. I'd love to ask Governor Sununu what he thinks about it.
Thank you. We'll be right back with more on this fight in Florida.
You know?
MSNBC, the whole picture.
Recently, I've been urging you to remember our name,